in the very early days when there was an issue with the charger, it rang straight to my cell phone. I picked up calls at 6 a.m. I picked up calls at midnight. People were trying to charge their car and something went wrong, do whatever I could to solve it. Our biggest competitors kind of own everything end to end. The hardest moments we've had in the company is when that kind of implicit partnership did not pan out as we had hoped.
This season on Unicorn Leaders, we're exploring the Davids who take on the giants, the Goliaths, the founders who see what the world's missing and build it themselves. My name is Fahd. I'm the founder of Unicorn Labs and the host here in the Unicorn Leaders podcast. And we've been exploring these David versus Goliath stories. And today I get to sit down with Zak, founder of ChargeLab. See, his story begins in 2016 on a freezing Toronto morning. He was 23 years old, and in a parking lot, he was drilling through concrete, installing some EV chargers by hand. At the time, he looked more like a contractor than his CEO, but those were the early days. That was ChargeLab 1.0. And he always had this vision in his head that he was already thinking about. Perhaps, how do we make EV chargers more universal? How do we bring more EV chargers across this network, across Canada, and without having to build all the stations on his own? And that moment became the spark for ChargeLab, this new company that he starts by installing chargers and evolves into building software that actually powers all of these different EV chargers across the network. Zak realized early that the real opportunity wasn't in the hardware, but it was in the connectivity of everything. He shares about his patience being a big competitive advantage, how he waited for the right time in the market, how he had the courage to pivot from being sort of a contractor installing and moving towards code and software building, how his co-founder helped him make that pivot, how ChargeLab convinced giants like ABB and Siemens to partner with scrappy little Toronto startup. Today, ChargeLab powers over 15,000 EV chargers across North America. It's on a mission to become the Android of EV charging, while Tesla sort of builds up this walled garden. It's a story about conviction, a story about timing, and redefining what it means to win. The Davids versus Goliaths rewrite the rules. The Davids don't just slay Goliath. Sometimes they don't need to. They just need to build what Goliath won't. Zak, I'm really excited for this interview, and I'll tell you why. One, when I get to research people, I get to build an image in my head as to who they are, right? I'm like, okay, Zak did this, and I'm reading your stories, and I'm going on Perplexity and pulling up articles and past podcasts and trying to understand this story of ChargeLab, because I'm looking for these Davids, these small, mighty teams that choose unconventional ways to create impact and who find ways to win, redefine success, redefine winning. And your story has been a fun one because I actually like its starting point. 2016, it's freezing in Toronto. You're 23 years old and you're in a parking lot. You are drilling through concrete and you're trying to install some EV chargers. Where does that story for you start?
Yeah, well, it actually goes back even a little bit before that. In 2015, I started to get really interested in electric vehicles. And prior to that, I had heard of EVs, but I had kind of thought of them as a substitute. And there must be something inferior about them, right? Because there was a lot of kind of marketing about why EVs are never going to work up until that point in time. But in 2015, actually in Montreal, I got in some test vehicles at an electric vehicle event, and it totally changed my perspective, right? It's completely silent. It feels like the future driving around. It accelerates like a BMW. It's got all the latest tech in it. But what I was driving was like a dinky little Nissan Leaf. The new ones look kind of cooler, but back then they had this alien spaceship feeling.
Yeah.
It really changed my perspective. And I had run a relatively successful business before. I had only a couple years earlier graduated from a computer science degree at McGill. And so I had kind of this combination of real world experience from my previous business. We did contracting and construction and things like that. I wanted to build a technology company. And here I found this opportunity in this niche of, hey, if there's going to be a bunch more electric vehicles on the road, somebody's going to need to build out the charging network. This hardware is not that complicated. It's going to be relatively commoditized. You're going to have big companies eventually come to market like ABB and Eaton and Siemens and Schneider. And they were starting to come to market with EV charging products in those early days, but they didn't have a software layer. And so the aha moment, a couple years after 2016, by around 2020 was, hey, somebody needs to build an open and interoperable software platform that can sit on top of any hardware. And that's what we pivoted to effectively in 2020 is, going from that early business of going out in the cold, drilling through concrete, getting EV chargers installed to, hey, there's actually not going to be hundreds of EV chargers or thousands of EV chargers that get installed in North America. There's going to be millions, and there's going to be a huge gap for an open, interoperable, kind of universal software layer to connect and manage hardware built by all of these different players. We were fortunate enough to find some great investors, raise venture capital, grow the team here in Toronto, and bring the product to market. And we've been successful doing that. The ending of the story hasn't been written, but it's, a very exciting time to be working on EVs and EV charging and just rethinking about how we use energy in the future.
You shared quite a few things. I think you've given us the arc here. So you've kind of laid out where you started and where things got to. And I'm going to plop us in back into that story in a few different moments because I sort of want to know. There's three things I want to know. I want to understand the leaders of these David versus Goliath companies, right? These David companies. I sort of want to understand you, like what sort of characteristics in your leadership and in the other teams, like how you approached your thinking and what other people can learn from some of that. Then I also want to learn about the team. What sort of team dynamics? What sort of team culture? What did you establish to create a team that can compete at this level? Because here you are, small little David trying to compete in a massive industry. And then lastly, what were your key strategies that have allowed you to maneuver? I want to actually know, why did you start with chargers? Where did that insight come where you're like, I'm going to work on installing chargers in all of these buildings? Take me to kind of the original founding thinking.
Well, look, what I really fell in love with was electric vehicles. It was actually the car. And what fascinated me about them is just the first principles. It made so much more sense. A Honda Civic has about 2,400 moving parts in it between the internal combustion engine, the drivetrain, the gearbox, timing belt, all these different components. A Tesla, I think, has 9 moving parts in it, including the door handles. And so fundamentally, like an electric vehicle just makes so much more sense than a gasoline vehicle. And the way you can figure this out kind of intuitively is you can look at everything else we use in our lives. Like there could be a world where you carried around a device where you pour a little bit of gasoline in it and you start a little bit of an engine. And now you can use what we call a cell phone powered by gas. But it's just so unimaginable to us. It's just so much more compact, more efficient, cleaner. You don't want a smartphone that like smells bad when you turn it on, right? And so vehicles are no different. Like an electric engine is so much simpler than an internal combustion engine. I mean, an internal combustion engine is really like a marvel of engineering, how complex and efficient they've gotten over the last 150 years. But now that the battery technology is good enough to actually build viable electric vehicles, there's just so many advantages to electric vehicles. But the question of why charging, I think, is a very good question. And I've always been interested in the kind of back-end infrastructure, right? Like when we look at the modern world today, like I think we can say Amazon, like what an amazing company, delivers anything you want to your door in like 12 minutes. It's incredible. But, and I think Jeff Bezos would say this too, like Amazon could not be built at number one without the internet, but number two without roads and delivery companies and gas stations, now electric vehicle charging stations.
Yeah.
Like all this infrastructure enables the next company to get built. And I think just another example of that is still in the Amazon world is like Amazon at one point in the early 2000s was hosting one of the most popular websites in the world. And they had a big problem with how to serve users with, data and servers. And so they built this internal business, Amazon Web Services, and they started building data centers to host their website. And then they said, why don't we lease out server space in our data centers to other companies? And now AWS, I think, is the most profitable part of Amazon. And what that is fundamentally an internet infrastructure business. So for, a long time, I had just been fascinated with, yes, there's the cool kind of front end business, the electric vehicle. You can get a Tesla, you can get a Rivian, you can get, any kind of new tech toy on the front end. But I personally had always been drawn to the back end infrastructure. And I think that's how I landed on wanting to start an EV charging company.
What's your first steps here? Do you go find a few friends to kind of help you out? You go like, okay, how do I get these chargers? How do I sell them? Do I find a manufacturer that already builds them and I buy them? What's your early steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually have like the counterfactual and the factual of what to do when starting a business. When I first went out selling EV chargers in 2016, I was effectively a solo founder,
Yeah.
right? And I learned a lot about the industry. I found some early customers, but it wasn't until 2020 when I met my co-founder Asan and ChargeLab became ChargeLab. Like I would really say we actually even had a different name for the company back in 2016.
Oh, what was it called?
It's called Mio Electric. You can Google it. You will find nothing. It doesn't exist anymore.
You scrubbed the wall.
I didn't even scrub it. It's just like we were very small scale. We were a local player. It's
Yeah.
installing charging stations. In 2020, Asan joined. We became ChargeLab. We raised venture capital. And so I think, I have both kind of the first 4 years in this industry, which were very challenging when I started to have this technology vision of the software we wanted to build, to now I can kind of look at the last 5 years, 2020 to now, when I actually had the business partner and the thought partner to figure out, hey, where do we go raise money? Where do we start on the technology build outside? So in the kind of traditional sense of things, I would be the business co-founder and Hassan would be the technical co-founder. But I think what works so well about a relationship is it actually goes both ways. Like I'm more technical than most business co-founders. I studied computer science at McGill. I wrote mobile apps when Swift first came out as a programming language for iOS when they went from Objective-C to Swift. And so I have some technical experience. At the same time, Ehsan is truly like one of the most brilliant business minds that I know. He thinks critically about markets. He thinks critically about sales and marketing and prioritization. We came together and he built more of the tech and I did more of the business. But I think having a partner where you can understand each other's worlds was certainly very valuable for us.
Talk to me about the pivot. So that 2019 to 2020, meeting us on, making this decision to kind of be co-founders, the shift from being essentially contractors
Yep.
who are, purchasing equipment and installing it and finding people who want to, have these chargers in their buildings and their homes. What are some of the series of events that led to it?
I think the things that led to it is like fundamentally, I wanted to build technology. I wanted to build a software company. It took a couple years of doing the reselling, contracting business to really find the right opportunity. And I think other folks will do it a lot faster than I did. Like I was young, it was a new industry. The industry was
You were learning also, like you were using that time. There's a lot of patience in your story. There's
yeah,
a lot
that's
of
right.
yeah.
That's right. But I think I would encourage like what was invaluable about that time is like in that first kind of 3-4 year period, there were many ideas of the technology that we could have built. We thought about building an app that just showed all of the chargers from all the different networks on one app, right? Other people ended up building those apps, and there's apps that a lot of people use, but that's been very difficult to monetize, as an example. Another idea was to, build our own EV charger end to end. And today, our thesis is that that's going to be pretty commodified, and there's going to be companies that are really good at doing that are strictly hardware companies and supply chain companies. But I don't think that's where we would have been successful. So I think the advantage in being patient is like really understanding the market first and selling to customers and talking to customers allowed us to pick the layer that exactly had the biggest gap in the market, which was this back end management for folks who already had a hardware solution, but did not have a software to run and operate their networks. We had started this business as what I would now actually call a value-added reseller or a VAR. We resold the product, but we kind of consulted the customer and helped them along the journey. And so there's a lot of people who started businesses doing LED retrofits. So they would go into buildings and do kind of sustainability audits and help switch from inefficient old lights to efficient new LED lights. But then the LED lights last for like 40 years. So they needed another product to sell. And so as we transitioned to being the technology company, the market matured and a whole bunch of new VARs or value-added resellers popped up, and those actually became our partners and our channel.
Hmm.
So today at ChargeLab, we primarily sell and we work through partners. There's certainly cases where the customer will come directly to us.
Who are your customers?
The end customers are anybody who wants to install and operate an EV charger at their property. So that tends to be a lot of multifamily buildings, so condos and office buildings, convenience stores, gas stations, libraries, community centers, parking operators. These are our end customers. But since we're only providing the software layer, we partner with what we call channel partners or resellers. And so what we had been in the early days, that value-added reseller, is actually now who we partner with. We work with local companies in Toronto and Vancouver and New York and Los Angeles and, Dallas and every kind of city in North America. And we work with these local on-the-ground experts, again, often like electrical contractors or kind of similar businesses like that. But these folks will go to the condo building and say, hey, we will help do an audit of your building, figure out how many chargers you should put in. We will do all the electrical installation. We actually have to put in panels and breakers and run cable and, drill through concrete. We'll supply you with the hardware, and we'll bring in this great back-end software platform that we know of called ChargeLab to operate the chargers.
Who's making the decision as to what the units are that are being installed?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the end customers are relatively indifferent to the technology I've installed until something goes wrong,
Mhm.
right? And so that's where the VARs are a really important step. They're a trusted advisor,
Yeah.
right? And so a lot of what we do is working with and developing the channel and educating these turnkey installers on, why our solution can beat our near peers and competitors, but often why our solution can beat the Goliath solution. Like, why would you go with an open ChargeLab software and one of the, dozens of hardwares we work with versus the totally vertically integrated Tesla or ChargePoint
Mhm.
solution?
It takes you years of being in the grunt work to sort of start to identify all the potential opportunities, right? Sort of, can we build our own full chargers, integrate software and hardware? What are the gaps in the market? I think that's, again, using our David versus Goliath analogy here. It's sort of like David is there watching and like collecting and doing a bit of work and just watching the industry grow and shift and looking for the opportunity, the right slingshot. What convinces you of this being the right opportunity, and then how does the partnership form with your co-founder?
Started the business for the first couple years, sold a couple hundred chargers, and that wasn't enough to justify a billion-dollar valuation. But I said, hey, I think through doing this, I've learned that where we should really pivot to is software. And that's where we'll find, the opportunity, and built the platform. Took a lot of work, got our first 1,000 chargers in the ground, and then turned around and said, okay, how do we get to 10,000 now? We're talking about how do we get to 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, and eventually 1 million. My co-founder actually found me because he was looking at the EV charging industry and saying, hey, look, there's already somebody in Toronto building this. Why don't we team up and take it to the next level? I think we complemented each other in terms of the actual division of labor and who could do which parts, but it also like figuring out the go-to-market and who to focus on and how to scale and things like that.
How do you feel those early years shaped your leadership in the next 5 years of sort of the evolution of the business?
Yeah, I mean, I just couldn't imagine it doing it any other way. Like in the very early days when there was an issue with the charger, it rang straight to my cell phone,
Yeah.
right? I picked up calls at 6 a.m. I picked up calls at midnight. People were trying to charge their car and something went wrong and it was a hardware issue, it was our software. Didn't matter. I would do whatever I could to solve it. I think it's a lot easier to lead people when you're in the trenches with them. AI kind of coming into the white collar workplace. And you're already seeing this at companies like Meta, like they're starting to cut out the middle management layer.
Mhm.
But I think the other thing that you need from upper management is very grounded, hands-on leaders. Because when AI makes individuals so much more efficient and capable of doing more output, whether that's salespeople doing more cold calls, engineers writing more code, I think there's less of a need for all of that kind of like overhead and infrastructure that I would call middle management. And so I think we are trying to be a shining example of that at ChargeLab, which is like, not how can we add more headcount? Actually, how can we do more with less? How can we double, triple, quadruple our number of deployments without increasing headcount? But I mean, I think that's just my leadership style, right? Is like be very on the ground with the team, lead by example, but at the same time, understand when you need to scale yourself and when it's maybe not helpful for the CEO to pick up every customer support call, and then trust your customer support team to, to do that and to carry that forward.
So bring me into the first year of the new team. You strike this deal with the co-founder,
Mhm.
and you find this complementary person who's interested in the vision, interested in what's next. There's a moment where you go back to the team and say, we're no longer doing the hardware stuff. What was that moment like?
It was relatively easy because the team was very small or non-existent. Um, I think at the time before Hassan joined, I think I had 2 salespeople and, 1 operations and fulfillment, and, like, guess what? You still need to sell software and you still need to fulfill it, and so I think those people transitioned pretty seamlessly, but I think the big thing was going from being a team of, like, 5 people to, the first year that Hassan and I were working together, we scaled up from 5 people to 15 people.
Mhm.
The next year we went to 30 people, and the year after that we went to 60 people, and that's where we've been at ever since. And so, I think the big thing was really getting that VC funding, realizing that like, hey, we have real customers and we're serving them, but to go, serve the scale and number of customers that we want, we're going to need to invest, ahead of where our current revenues are at. And that's essentially what venture capital is, right? You're just borrowing money from the future to build out today that you're hopefully one day going to pay back with future revenues and profits and things like that. It was the middle of COVID. So we started building the engineering team remotely. COVID comes to a wind down about 2 years ago, and we get an office in Toronto and make another transition to, okay, like we're still doing the majority of our software development work from home, but still coming in a couple times a week to interact with each other. I think as an early stage software startup, like it's really important to have a focus and get really good at one thing first. And what we started with was we thought the ways that people could interact with EV chargers at the time in 2020 were just like totally last century bad interactions. Like you had to download a mobile app on cellular data, which was like 200 megabytes. You get to a new charger, you've never used this charger before, you have to download a new mobile app. And then for some reason, like what our competitors, the Goliaths at the time, not Tesla, but the others, you'd have to like put a wallet balance on that. So like before you could charge, you have to put $20 on your charge point account. And so the first thing we set out to do in 2020 was like basically rebuild that. And we said, okay, we'll have a mobile app if people want it, but you don't have to download anything. We'll do a web app. We put a QR code on the charger. You just scan it. You can pay with your phone. Now as simple as just tapping Apple Pay. Not in the initial release. That's what we have today.
So your first innovation is removing friction from the current process.
Removing friction from the EV driver experience, because I was an EV driver and I wanted a smoother experience. And that was kind of the first focus. I think the second one was interoperability. And so we realized that like, hey, there are going to be a lot of people building EV charging hardware. We need to make our software work with as many different hardwares as we can. And that's not easy to do because you're connecting to a device that was designed and built in Italy, India, China, like Taiwan, all of the different devices at different quirks. So we had to kind of scale that out, figure out how to manage 100 different models of devices on our system. So the big thing we're doing now is actually like leveraging some of these new AI technology and applying that to reliability, figuring out, can we proactively reboot a charging station to prevent it from getting to a state where it's going to deliver a
Hmm.
bad experience? Can we automate various parts of the network, whether it's firmware updates or things like that? What's interesting about ChargeLab is like we're trying to compete with these larger companies that are in our market and had a head start on us. But then at the same time, our whole market is scaling up. And I think the expectations of EV drivers are changing over that time. And so it's kind of a double race. Like one is, the race against the competition. But two is kind of the race to just go through all the changes in this industry. One key example that doesn't necessarily touch the software side, but has kind of second order repercussions on us is up until a couple years ago, everyone had a certain charging cable that they could plug into their vehicle. So if you had a Toyota, BMW, Audi,
It was all different.
no, it was all the
It's
same.
all the same.
But Tesla had a different plug.
Yes.
And so it was a little bit of a USB-C and lightning cable scenario where Tesla had the lightning cable. But then counter to the USB-C, what folks realized is actually Tesla had designed a better plug.
Hmm.
And so Ford was the first shoe to drop, and Ford said, we're going to switch to the Tesla plug. And then in very quick succession, all the North American EV manufacturers switched over as well. So now we're in the process of actually switching everything over to the Tesla plug, which is no longer called Tesla because it's no longer proprietary to Tesla. We call it the North American Charging Standard, or NACS. But that's just like one example of like, an industry is not mature when like the literal plug you plug into the device, just changed.
One of the things that's interesting about the Davids versus Goliaths is David often needs to ride a rising tide.
Right.
And so the tide is shifting. more demand for EVs, more demand for charging infrastructure across this vast North American landscape. And so part of your strategy is to ride this wave and see where
That's right.
where it takes you. You start building the software 1 year, 2 years into this kind of pivot, build out the team. You're building out the intelligence of trying to understand how to actually serve so many different hardware units.
Yep.
Where are some of the most difficult moments in that? Where are the moments where it's like, oh man, like it's just not working? Where are the moments where the team's finding it difficult, where you're finding it difficult, where there's some things just aren't panning out?
Yeah, well, I think look, our biggest competitors kind of own everything end to end. They will install the charger, maintain it. They build the chargers like Tesla supercharging stations, things like that. I think the hardest moments we've had in the company is when that kind of implicit partnership did not pan out as we had hoped. Meaning, hey, for us, ChargeLab, the open software guys, and let's say ABB and Wallbox and Delta and Zerova and these are all hardware companies that are kind of the open hardware guys. For us to beat the guys who are vertically integrated, we're gonna have to like work together and be like, hey, does your hardware work with our software? Does our software work with our hardware? Are we serving the customers together? And so I think the hardest moments we had is when we, encountered, partners who we should be aligned with, but like we've had moments where everybody's resources are constrained. We had, hardware partners. We said, hey, we think we found a bug in your firmware. Like, can you fix this because it's affecting the customer? And they were like, we'll get to it, but like we don't have the resources now, right? And I'm sure we've done the same thing on the other side where like the hardware guy's like, hey, ChargeLab, we really need you to integrate this new model of charger. And now we have a very streamlined process for how we integrate chargers. But back at the time we did it. And so we might have taken a little bit too long. And so I think the hardest part is like when you are trying to create this open ecosystem, I think the analogy here would be like, for Samsung and Google to beat Apple, like they have to work together. And if at any point the software team at Google was like, Samsung, like that's your problem. Like we can't fix that in the Android OS. Or, Android was like, hey, Google, we really need you to add this feature. And Google's like, now we don't want to add that. I think that makes it very hard to be trying to push for this open and interoperable path. And, you know, I'm very grateful for a lot of the hardware partnerships we've had. I think we've really developed strong relationships with hardware partners and are always working to collaborate and make sure we're giving them what they need from a software perspective. And then, hoping that they can return the favor on kind of making sure their devices are upgraded and maintained in the way that we would hope they are.
Yeah. So in a way, with our analogy here, David is building up a little army of Davids.
Yeah.
Finding a few partners who want to be able to collectively take on this industry.
Yeah, I mean, and look, to be very clear, like we love Tesla, right? The number one vehicle we charge on our network is a Tesla because it's the most popular EV in the market. And yes, when they go out in public, they have a supercharger network, but they still park in the same condo buildings and office buildings. And with an adapter, you can plug into any EV charging station with your Tesla. And we love the kind of trailblazing and groundbreaking work Tesla did to build the first EVs, build the first charging networks. At the same time, we believe in a world where Tesla's not the only charging network. We actually think the more charging networks, the better. We don't want 2 or 3. We want like 20 or 30 or 40, right? And that's what you see in the world of gas refueling, right? You have Shell and Esso and Exxon and BP and all these different brands. Charging is going to be even more diverse because not only are we going to be upgrading all the gas stations on the road, we're also charging in people's office buildings and condo buildings and single family homes and community centers. I think in many ways, our way to win as a David versus Goliath is to make sure there's a lot of winners, a lot of VARs that are successful installing chargers, a lot of hardware manufacturers that are successful. We want to see a world where there's, dozens of options for hardware and installers and networks you can charge at, but hopefully we can be a software provider behind, a lot of them.
Yeah, the customer who's installing the chargers in their condo buildings and in their business offices, I feel like would default to non-Tesla chargers because the Tesla superchargers are only for the Teslas and the other ones
That's right.
have all the other EVs and you can plug your Tesla in it. Is that in itself a competitive advantage that you're seeing more networks choosing these sort of more open-ended EV chargers, or is the Tesla chargers just that much, more powerful that they have a value prop on their own?
Well, I think this is a very interesting distinction because where Tesla's really the Goliath is their supercharger network.
Yeah.
which is you're traveling on the road and you're going between cities. You need to fill up really quickly. Tesla's got the best, most reliable, most robust supercharger network. But at home and or at the office, Tesla almost expects you to, just use a basic charger. I mean, there's a Tesla home charger you can buy. I don't think they make a ton of money off of it. It's pretty cheap. In many ways, Tesla's not in the business of going into multifamily buildings and office buildings and putting in chargers. And so I think, we were talking a little bit ahead of time about like, how does David win against the Goliath? It's not by playing Goliath's game. And so like Tesla's game is to build and own this massive supercharger network. And frankly, that's good. And it helps our business because it gets more Teslas and EVs on the road. But what we think is, the majority of charging sessions, and this is actually statistically and factually true, are not going to be at fast charge like a supercharger network. Somewhere around 90% of charging sessions are going to happen either at home or at school or at the grocery store or where you shop. And so our kind of like covert little like David versus Goliath is like, let the big companies, the charge points, the Electrify America, let them go invest a ton in the public charging network that are high visibility while we quietly deploy hopefully millions of EV chargers in single family home garages, in office buildings, in condo buildings. And all of a sudden wake up with a network where do we have the fastest charger or the sexiest looking charger? No, but are we dispensing 9 out of 10 of the charging sessions that people do? Yes, because at the end of the day, people use their electric vehicle like they use their smartphone. They just plug it in every night.
Yeah. No, I honestly, I think that's a brilliant way to think about it. I often talk about how Lyft's strategy against Uber was to wait for Uber to go into a city, fight all the lawsuits, and then
Yeah.
go in after,
Yeah.
so that they don't have to deal. Because when you're dealing with the Goliaths who have such excess capital, you can't play their game. They're gonna win those, supercharger kind of infrastructure, the big brand pieces. What you're saying is that they're helping raise the tide,
Yes.
and you're gonna go in and pick the people up who actually don't just need they need the regular ferry ride instead of like the big, cross country ride. We talked a lot about strategy so far, but talk to me about your team. You're running a team of 60 people. Like, what are the cultural principles that make high performing teams for you at ChargeLab? What are the things that you have had to learn the hard way, maybe from a cultural principles? And then what are some things that you've held on to from the beginning that you feel were also, winners?
Well, I think one differentiation about our team that we're very proud of, but has lots of pros and cons is fundamentally we're a technology company. Over half of our team works on product and engineering. Like the number one job in our company by number of people is software developer, right? We have more software developers than salespeople, marketing, finance, accounting, anything. We're also very proud to develop our technology in-house here primarily in Toronto, but fundamentally in North America. A lot of our competitors, look for low cost software development options overseas, kind of contracting out the development work to lower cost markets. And look, there's a ton of great developers in Eastern Europe and India and Asia. But I think when you're rethinking a fundamental technology like how people, refuel their vehicle, it's helpful to have people who live here and will actually use these charging stations. Our identity, our culture is fundamentally one of product and engineering, and we're a technology company through and through, and we're very proud to do, all of our R&D in-house here in Toronto. At the same time, like I almost have an over indexing on technology, and I've really had to learn the importance of a very strong sales team, right? The best product doesn't win. I think go to market and partnerships and distribution and sales are so critical. I've heard that, first time founders think about product and second time founders think about distribution. And so, I've tried to kind of like evolve through that and go from being a first time founder thinking a lot about product to now thinking, okay, every day I'm going to spend my time on distribution. How do we sell the product? I'm incredibly blessed to work with the team that I work with. Like I spend one-on-one time with everyone from our engineers to our designer to our finance team to, marketing, sales, product, every function, truly far smarter, more competent people than myself. Maybe what I can do is I can bring it all together and look at every function and try to make the best strategic decision for the business. But I could not code this part of the product better than a developer. I could not design this part of the product better than our designer.
And how was that transformation for you, kind of going from the person doing it all to having how many employees now? 60, you said?
Yeah, 60. I mean, I think there's certainly a learning process of like when things go better when you just get out of the way, right? I think that's like a very important learning. But I think also, like, as a founder, like, in a founder-led business in particular, like, people, joined because they saw your vision for the future and they wanted to help build it, and so they don't want you to be totally backed off, right? So I think it's always striking that balance of, like, letting the team cook and do what they do really well,
Mm.
but having enough situational awareness to say, "Hey, from the early days, actually, I'm connected with this big company that we're trying to sell for to let me make a call and see if I can move things along faster," or, "Hey, I'm, like, probably the number 1 dog fooder in our company." Like, I drive an EV, I drive multiple EVs, and I, use all sorts of different charging stations. I use all of the ChargeLab power charging stations, and I use all of our competitors. And so I always try to, have helpful product feedback from, using it not as a CEO of ChargeLab, but as an EV driver trying to move around in the world. I think in the age of AI and kind of leaner teams, like, you really can't focus enough on talent density. In the Netflix book, No Rules and Rules, or the book by the co-founders of Netflix, they talk a lot about talent density, and I believe in that. I think we have competitors with 400 employees, we have competitors with 1,000 employees, and they're, always gonna be able to crank out more sales meetings than us, or, more features than us. But what we can do is we have less communication overhead. We can move as one to go attack the biggest opportunities. And as new opportunities present themselves, we've been able to respond a lot more quickly than a larger organization would. So yeah, I mean,
I mean,
that's
those are the advantages of being the David, right?
yeah.
Like being the small, nimble. I think you hit the nail on the head. Not just that you can control the talent density better when your numbers tighter, but it is communication is a big part, right? How do you like how much time do you spend managing and organizing the resources versus doing what the resources should be doing? What's worked for you in being this nimble and being tighter? What are some of the kind of practices or cadences you've put into place for the team?
As an efficient and relatively small company in this scheme of things, like, we try to have a lack of bureaucracy as an advantage. We try to make decisions very quickly. We try to utilize the two-way door framework. This is a two-way door. Let's make a decision quickly and move through it. We are very intentional about things like meetings, right? I think especially in hybrid or remote work environments, it's easy to just put a recurring calendar invite and everybody shows up. And, so I'd say about twice a year, like, we go out and we clean out, a bunch of meetings. Not because we don't like each other. We love spending time with each other, and we have social events to get the company together. We go out and go to baseball games. Like, we do all these fun things as a company. But at the end of the day, when you have a high talent density, you want people who really want to solve business problems, both on the engineering and sales side. Like, all of our engineers are like, how can I add more business value? How can I ship a feature that more people are going to use? And so, the number one thing that gets in the way of, adding business value is kind of unnecessary meetings and coordination. So we run a tight ship and everybody knows what they're focused on. Everybody has their KPIs or OKRs and their focus. We're not afraid to, like, recognize when something's broken and go fix it, whether that's a communication cadence, whether that's a product roadmap, whether that's, our pricing strategy. I think being the David, we have to, like, use all of our speed and agility advantages that we can to win at the end of the day.
Yeah. Where did you get things wrong with the culture or the team? Like you're growing, you've grown a lot, 5 years, 60 new employees, like some mishires or there's some missteps or there's some
I think probably the biggest mistakes are when we made a big hiring sprint in, like, one area.
mm,
Like, there was one point where we grew our sales team from, like, 2 people to 12 people
yeah, in
in
like
in a
few
month.
months, in a month, yeah.
And it was due to a funding round. We thought it was the right thing to do. Let's go get more revenue, and we hired a lot of great people, but it was just, like, too fast, too much. And I think we've done the same thing in other areas in the business as well. I think especially when you start to focus more on not number of people, but, like, quality of people, that you wanna hire slow, and be very methodical about who you bring onto the team and bring into the culture. The other thing that kinda happened when we did that big sprint and put a bunch of people in one department is you end up getting silos,
Mm.
right? And since that point in time, we've really emphasized that we're one team and one charge lab. Like, at the end of the day, one thing that I'm proudest of today that was not the case 3 years ago is we don't have any friction between sales and product and engineering. Like, you talk to people in tech, and there are very contentious relationships between product and engineering, very contentious relationships between sales and marketing, or between sales and product. But we've really established a culture where everybody here wants the same thing. We wanna build a kick-ass product. We wanna onboard more customers. We wanna win. We're a fairly competitive team, but we don't get there by saying, "Well, I couldn't close the deal because the product team couldn't deliver this feature." We never do any of that shit. We don't have any time for
Mhm.
it. So I'm very lucky today to be working with the best set of executives that we've had. I'd even shout them out by name: Asan, Kevin, Rachel, Kim, Cedric, the best leadership team that we have for sure. They just set the tone of like, hey, we're all on the same team. Like, we are not a big enough company to have like, the East Coast and West Coast divisions like fighting with each other.
How do you keep scrappiness alive when the company grows and the company continues to grow?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you asked this, because I think one of the things that every venture-backed company can learn from is, like, companies have a tendency organically and naturally, like, to start acting like bigger companies.
Mhm.
Like, I'm not exactly sure what causes this. I think maybe small companies
It's
just
like
try to mimic bigger
the
companies.
big companies are successful and they do this, therefore we should do it. And it's like, no, no, they're successful
And it's
despite,
successful in spite
in
of it,
spite of
yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, again, in a collaborative and friendly way. Big companies have a lot of meetings, and they're all individually like, should I have a one-on-one with this person? I mean, their function overlaps with mine so much. Sure, we should have a one-on-one. Should we do a quarterly business review? Well, is our business important? Should we review it at least every quarter? Absolutely. Well, we also have OKRs, so should we do our OKR review? Like, you can justify like, every number of meetings, but I think you have to be really critical there. I think it's also just like, I try to be really present with the team in the office and customer meetings and product roadmap reviews, just to let people know that like, if you can think of a better way to do this, like, you should go do that, right? Like, anybody at ChargeLab can change a process, a product, a procedure, like pricing even. They can say, "Hey, Zach, I think we need to like update our go-to-market pricing and strategy." And we encourage people to do that. So I think you just have to actively be reminding everyone that, hey, this is still, day one. We control our destiny. Like, it's me and 59 of my best friends, close collaborators, co-conspirators, business partners, really, 59 co-founders, if you want to put it like that, and like just letting everybody know that like, hey, we haven't made it yet and we've got a long way to go.
I mean, that's a real sense of empowerment that you're trying to instill in everyone. Aside from just what can sometimes be lip service that companies talk about empowerment, how do you find you actually, you're saying everybody at the company here can make decisions, can question, can push. How do you ensure that as power dynamics do get into play and as silos do happen and as a company continues to grow?
Yeah, the only way to do it, like, lip service doesn't work. You have to do it, right? Like, if someone speaks up with an idea and you don't consider it, and because it didn't come from an executive and you just shoot it down, nobody's going to speak up with the next idea. So when people do speak up with things that they want to change, we absolutely listen and implement it very clearly if it's a good idea, and very visibly too. Like, we want to say like, hey, John came up with this idea, and so starting next week, every ticket we get from customer support is gonna have this field,
Yeah.
right? I think Elon Musk talks about, like, building the factory that builds the product
Yeah.
being, like, harder than building the product. I think that's true of a company too. Like, you really have to always be fine-tuning your culture. The other thing I was gonna say on it is you do wanna go out and proactively probe, and, like, yes, we wanna have a culture where anyone can speak up and make a change, but then twice a year, we also, like, send out a survey and say explicitly, "Okay, hey, which should we change?" Like, I'm not gonna wait for you to come tell me. I'm now asking you directly, what do we need to change? And I think that's been a really effective process. And, shout out to our people team. Their job is to make sure people are bringing the best ideas to the forefront.
What have been some of the pivotal rituals from both an operational and culture perspective, and what have been some of the symbols and cues?
Yeah, I think in terms of symbols, like, core company values are essential. Like, they're great for a bunch of reasons. Number one, when we're recruiting and hiring people, they let people know what we stand for. Like, we're very explicit in every hiring process. These are our company values. This is what we're vetting you against. Yes, we're vetting that you're a good engineer and that you can communicate well, but we're also vetting, are you an owner? That's one of our values. We're also vetting, do you like to find the root cause? Like, that's one of our values. And so we vet everybody bringing to the company on values. We can shout each other out for values. So we say like, hey, one of our values is being customer obsessed. And I want to shout out, Tom, who,
Mm.
you know, did this with this customer, and so I'm showing him out under that value. I think good culture at a company is a culture that you can disagree with, right? I think if every company value that you have, everyone's like, oh yeah, like, treat people great.
Then they're too platitudey.
Yeah, like
Just
you really need to be spikier. You want things that people disagree with.
well, especially people who are outside your company. Like,
Yeah, like we're looking for people who are like independent, a bit feisty almost, like people who are gonna get antsy if you tell them exactly what to do. They would rather go discover what's the biggest problem that I can go solve, today. But that's not gonna be for everyone. I think there's a bunch of other, you mentioned kind of culture building rituals. Like we do get the team together in person on several different cadences. We also think getting teams together is very important. So like our engineering and product teams are broken into pods. And so it's very important that the pod will spend the most time with each other. They'll also have time with the broader team, but they're getting together, very frequently. I also, I think there are kind of like creative tools out there that exist today. Every company tries to implement a peer reward system, which is like people call it kudos,
yeah,
right? Where you
you
like give it out. From what I've talked to about other CEOs, like none of them work. We have a kudos system that works really well. It's implemented through Slack. It's just a specific tool.
Hey Taco.
It is Hey Taco.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's weird in the human psychology as to why it works. Have you thought about why it works?
Well, there's a couple things. Like one, there's a scarcity. Like
Yes.
humans deal very well with scarcity. Like if I can just give, Fahd a kudos badge, like whenever it's like, okay, like fine, whatever. But when it's like, hey, I only have 5 tacos that I can give out today, I'm gonna like value them. It's great the way they built this tool. You implement it in every Slack channel. So you don't have to go log into your HR system,
Yeah.
sign in, put in your 2FA. Okay, now I'm going to go give some. You're just in Slack in any random channel. You're like, hey, gonna give you some tacos for this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then, I think they've gamified it in a bunch of ways. But like, shout out to Hey Taco and
Yeah,
recommend.
we use it too, honestly. It's weird how as soon as you add little emoji and a scarcity of how much you can give, people start to give it because it feels like it's actually a thing I can give. When before it's like, oh, we're just gonna do shout outs on Fridays or whatever. And like, you get a few here and there and they're not
We implemented Hey Taco from the beginning.
from the
But
beginning.
it's just, it's just a very helpful ritual for like recognition and bringing people together. But I think it goes back to the like meta point, which is like a company is a machine that you are always changing the oil on. You're always changing the tires, always, redoing the paint. Like you are always maintaining the company. And Hey Taco works fantastic today. If we just leave it exactly as is and we never tweak it, is it going to be as good in 5 years? Probably not. But we're not going to get to that point because we're always looking at all the tools we use and retweaking them.
I think that's distinctly what is powerful about David's is that they still have a handle on the factory.
Mhm.
Because when you're at 2,000 people, your factory is so big in multiple factories, you don't feel the factory that builds the machine, the factory that builds the product, right? Like it becomes so distant from the founders and becomes all of these bureaucratic management layers just to
Yes.
try and maintain that. But the fact that you are constantly, tinkering and figuring out what environment do we need to create the best performing teams is going to be what allows you to compete. Zach, where are we today? So 15,000 chargers?
That's right. Yes.
15,000 chargers. What's next? What is the next sort of slingshot? What is the next kind of piece that you're planning, that you're thinking is going to allow you to get to that next step function, that next stage in this battle, in this wave that you're surfing?
We're at 15,000 chargers today. We got to get to 50,000, and then 100,000, right? And then we got to get to 1 million. We're at an interesting point in the market today. The sentiment for electric vehicles has changed pretty dramatically in the United States. But, I think politics is at the very kind of surface level and culture is just below it. Like there are real trends and real shifts, how energy is used, how energy is generated, how much it costs, where it's distributed, that really transcend any political cycle.
Mhm.
And electric vehicles are not going away. I mean, you mentioned China, phenomenal EV penetration. They are well on their way to being, an 80%, 90% EV society. Norway already is. Personally, I am very concerned with climate change and the environment, and that's one of the reasons I started the company. But I also started the company because I believe that people are going to adopt electric vehicles, even if nobody in the world cared about climate change anymore, because it's fundamentally a better technology. It's fundamentally cheaper. I think I'm surprised that people still don't know this. Like, In an electric vehicle, you don't have to change oil. There's no oil. There's no gearbox. Like, there's very little maintenance. Like, you don't even have to change brake pads that much because the vehicle can recharge itself while braking. And so the engine goes two ways. Like a gas engine only pushes forward. An electric engine, if you run it in reverse, it just pushes electrons the other way. So rather than braking, you just recharge your battery as you're stopping. So I think it's a very, very bright future for the grid with, renewables and storage and EVs. And I think we will, one day reach a, fully sustainable energy ecosystem. And it will not be because of ideology. It will be because of cost and efficiency,
The
right?
politics of it all will go away. When energy becomes political, it's because the Goliaths are trying to defend their position.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what this
Absolutely.
really is that the ground is changing from underneath the Goliaths.
Yes.
And they're trying to hold on to the status quo through political lobbying, through just any defensive mechanism. But that's the classic innovator's dilemma. You're trying to hold on to a status quo that is being disrupted by simply a better technology. And with time, it's a death by a thousand cuts.
Well, and I think the advantage that the Davids almost always have is you're so small compared to Goliath that you're almost like you almost wouldn't be in the fight if the slope wasn't tilting your advantage. Like Goliath might be massive and coming after you, but like you're actually running down a hill, and so you have this advantage where eventually he's going to trip.
Or you're running up
over.
the stairs.
Yeah, and he can't come up.
he can't
Yeah,
get up the
yeah,
stairs.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
running
he
up the
can't get
stairs.
up the stairs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like we do have this advantage that, people love electric vehicles, right? For environmental reasons, sure. For technology reasons,
So much more
sure.
fun to drive.
They like the way a Cybertruck looks. There's a million reasons people love them.
So it feels like it aligns all the way through. Well, Zach, this has been fun. I feel like we've covered a lot of things, from how you think about leadership, how you think about your team, how you think about the market, how you think about your strategy and your slingshot, the co-founder pivot, and moving from sort of this scrappy, hardware first business that was just sort of to give you a chance to even learn the space, to this technology company and the software company that you're building. And I think we're lucky to have you here in Canada. We're lucky to have you here in Toronto, and excited to see where everything goes in the next few years. We'll be rooting for you all the way. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Great questions. I had lots of fun. Been great.
Awesome.